First of all, from our basic understanding of supply and demand, we know that marginal benefit declines as more of a good is consumed. You can see here marginal social benefit and private benefit both declining. Same is true here, of course. Downward sloping marginal benefit curve is also, remember, the demand curve for that good. So in order to consume more units as the marginal benefit falls, the price also has to fall. Prices along this line. Now, in the graph below, the graph here, we show that the marginal private benefit declines. Okay, just like the marginal social benefit declines. This represents the private benefits that people like Sue, who was the person who did the home improvements in our example, receive with more consumption of home improvements in the private market demand curve for the good. But remember, Sue's neighbors also benefit. So when we add the positive amount of marginal external benefit to the private benefit, what happens? Well, you get a marginal social benefit plus, or rather, marginal social benefit here is the marginal private benefit added to this amount of marginal external benefit. That's how these two come together. So what does this mean? Well, if we were looking at a purely market outcome, equilibrium occurs where supply curves intersect. And if you look here at market output, you're going to have supply of the marginal private benefit curve. So this is the amount of home improvements Sue would do, and the supply curve. Well, remember, the marginal private benefit only reflects the benefits received by the actual consumers of the home improvement goods. It doesn't reflect all the benefits like those received by her neighbors. So what happens here when we include the external benefits, the price society would be willing to pay for that Q market output, those total benefits, look what happens. That is the price society would be willing to pay because I benefit when Sue improves her house. So again, if the external benefits are considered, the socially optimal outcome is where the supply curve intersects the MSB curve, marginal social benefit curve. And you can see here that that happens at this P optimal. Again, intersection of marginal social benefit and the supply curve. At this point, the marginal cost of producing home improvements is equal to the marginal benefit society receives from consuming them. So again, remember, the socially optimal outcome is where marginal social benefit equals marginal social cost. And we'll talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. One of the important things to recognize, though, is a triangle that is going to represent, not surprisingly, deadweight loss. So we see that the market underproduces goods and generates, or rather underproduces goods that generate positive externalities. So look at this. This is market, right? So if we look at where the socially optimal output is, you see an area here between market and optimal output that is going to represent to us an area of deadweight loss. And that area, the triangle is going to be Q output minus Q market, and as a height of market and benefit. Here, P market and P benefit. So here's the triangle that represents a deadweight loss. Well, is there a policy that could be instituted to get rid of that deadweight loss? Sure there is. And that policy, if I can get to the right slide, is going to look something like this. The idea of a Pigovian subsidy is one that, in this case, encourages additional consumption by lowering the price of that social good, thereby stimulating demand for it. So how would that work in this case? Well, let's say in this particular example with home improvements, maybe the government provides a voucher to Sue, and those vouchers are redeemable for home improvement goods. So Sue and everybody else who wants to improve their home. This increases each person's private willingness to pay for each unit of the good. Why is that? Because when I decrease price of a product, demand increases for that product. So if the subsidy were equal to this amount, what's going to happen? We're going to increase output. We're going to increase output from here, the old point, to the new point. Now remember, this is the optimal price, but if we had a subsidy in place where Sue is getting a coupon in effect, here's the price that the consumer, Sue, is going to end up paying. So we get the impact of both increasing the output of that socially, that positive good, and also decreasing the effective price that has to be paid for the additional consumption of that good. All right, we talked about private versus social benefits in the last example. Now let's talk about private versus social costs. When a firm produces goods, there are both private costs and social costs, as we've discussed. An example, home electricity production, there's a difference between the private costs incurred by producers, so the cost of actually producing the product, and the external costs that citizens bear. Just like the prior example, we have private and external elements in the prior example as benefits, but here we have an equation that says total social cost of, in this case, home electricity production equals total private cost plus total external cost. Now, on an incremental basis, again, because we're economists, the next unit of electricity provides marginal social, marginal private, and marginal external costs, which can be written as MSC equals MPC plus MEC. Let's see what that looks like on a graph. Well, not surprisingly, you have a graph very similar to the one that we saw with the external benefits. Let's take a look at here where we're talking on the cost side. Rather than talking about marginal benefit, we're talking now about marginal social costs. There's a marginal private cost, but if you add to that the cost borne by, in this case, citizens with production of electricity, you get marginal private cost plus that external cost that citizens pay, right? Which ends up having our total marginal social cost. So, left to its own devices, the utility is going to produce the market quantity, which is their supply curve intersecting with the demand curve of consumers. The question that we have is there a way to create the socially optimal output, which has to take into consideration both the private cost and the external cost? Well, in that case, we're going to want to move up to the intersection of marginal social cost and marginal private cost. This, similar to the prior example, is that we have a deadweight loss here. Look at this. Now, what can we do to possibly eliminate the deadweight loss that would occur, the deadweight loss that stands between the Q market and optimal output? Well, what we can do in this case is impose a tax. And what does the tax do for us in this case? So the introduction of the tax, and in this case we're going to call it a Pigovian tax, on each unit of electricity supplied by the power plant increases each firm's private marginal cost of each unit of the good. Now, if the tax were equal to that marginal external cost that we're talking about here, and I think I have it better labeled here, marginal external cost, it shifts the marginal private cost upwards so that it was located on the marginal social cost curve, which is where we wanted to be in the first place. This would decrease output to Q optimal and increase the price consumers pay to P optimal, so from P market to P optimal. But the price the firm receives would be P optimal minus the amount of the tax, which is actually lower than the original price of P market. Now, naturally, producers don't like getting a lower price after each tax is paid on each unit of electricity. But what this tax does is provides an incentive to develop better ways of producing electricity so that less pollution is created and fewer dollars are spent paying taxes. Consumers also don't enjoy paying higher prices for electricity here versus here. Of course, consumers have been receiving a discount on electricity because the market price didn't reflect all of the costs we incur for generating the electricity there, the difference between the marginal private cost and the marginal social cost. So the new higher price reflects all of society's costs and sends consumers a powerful incentive to do what? To use less electricity. The last topic we're going to discuss tonight is network externalities. And I'm going to let you read through this because I'm about to run over the limit on YouTube and the length of a video. So I'd ask that you pause this, read it, and we'll talk about it more tomorrow. Have a great night.